Good morning, everyone. Great to be back with you again. We're in this series on Nehemiah, Keys to Victorious Christian Living. But I'm going to talk about somebody else to start with today. You know, many centuries ago, God spoke to a man named Noah and gave him his word that a great flood was going to come. He provided detailed instructions on what Noah should do to build an ark and explained how he and his family could be saved from this divine judgment. And the author of Hebrews says this. He says, "By faith, Noah, being warned by God about things not yet seen, in reverence prepared an ark for the salvation of his household." You know, sometimes it's not obvious when you think about the story of Noah, but you need to realize that after God spoke to Noah, 120 years passed with no indication of any kind of a flood. It was 120 years later that the flood came. Yet by faith, Noah worked all throughout that time building that ark. And when the flood came, he was prepared. You know, the author of Hebrews also says in Hebrews 12:1, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. In other words, faith is acting with assurance on the basis of things that are hoped for and acting in conviction even though you haven't seen those things yet. Noah acted in obedience to the point of self-sacrifice and ridicule on the basis of God's word alone before actually seeing anything, and waited 120 years for it to happen. What if he had said, "You know what, God, show me first. God, I'll start working after you show me something. Indicate to me that you're really going to bring this about. I'll start work on the ark after you prove your faithfulness to me." And that's not the way it works. If he had done that, then the flood would have come, and then he would have realized God was faithful, but it would have been too late. He would have been lost in that divine judgment with everybody else because he didn't build the ark. The author of Hebrews goes on to say, "Without faith it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him." You see, without faith it's impossible to please God. Without faith it's impossible because you're not preparing ahead of time, believing that God is going to be faithful. So you're not pleasing him along the way. Well, our scriptures today were from Hebrews and they were about Noah. But of course we are looking at Nehemiah. We're learning keys to victorious Christian living. And the first key last few times we were talking about was to seek the glory of God alone. Make sure God's on the throne in your life, even when you're being tested by trials. Focus on his glory rather than your deliverance. Now, the second key is very simple. Prepare ahead of time for God to be faithful. Prepare as you're waiting to see how God is going to be faithful. If I'm working as a team with somebody, there's a big difference if I trust them or if I don't. I can always demand to see that they've done their part before I do mine. But if I do that, then I'm not going to be prepared when they finish their part. I have to work trusting that they're doing their part too. The best partnerships work with this kind of synergy that goes together. You guys know me, maybe you don't, but I've always been a big New England Patriots football fan. And now Tom Brady has been traded to Tampa Bay, but he and Rob Gronkowski, they're a team, the tight end and the quarterback. And so many times I see in the game that Brady trusts Rob Gronkowski so much, they work together so much, that Brady will actually pass the ball a second or two before Rob Gronkowski even turns around to know where the ball is coming. And in his turn, he makes his turn and he turns around and the ball hits him right where he's supposed to catch it. They know each other so well and they anticipate each other so well. That's what God is saying about us. In the story of Nehemiah, we're going to see as we continue how much he acts with that same anticipation of God's faithfulness. He throws the pass without even seeing whether God is looking or not, knowing that in that moment God is going to turn around and be prepared, and he's going to be prepared. He doesn't wait for God to prove himself. He acts in the assurance of what he has not seen, in the assurance that God will be faithful. He has already prepared the groundwork in anticipation that his prayer will be answered, that God will be present. Now, we'll go through the details in that a little in the coming weeks. Well, a couple of weeks ago, I preached a sermon in church called God Can't Steer a Parked Car. I just want to bring that back around to us and say we need to be moving forward and preparing in anticipation of God's faithfulness. What are you praying for today? What situation do you want God to resolve for you? What challenge are you asking God to help you overcome? Think about those things and ask yourself, are you just praying for these things and then staring at the sky and waiting for God to do something, to make something happen miraculously while you just sit there and wait? Nehemiah prayed, presuming God's faithfulness, and he had already done the groundwork before God ever showed him that he was going to be faithful. Can you do the same? Can you consider how you can begin building the ark before God brings the flood? Think about that in your prayers today. Ask yourself what you can be doing to prepare the groundwork so that when God is faithful in the situations you're praying for, you'll be ready to take advantage. You'll be ready to walk in the path he has laid out before you. Give some thought to that. Pray through it, and God bless you. You have a great day.